One, the consequences of mass migration, a loss of a sense of self in society, a loss of sense of social cohesion, a loss of fundamental values like free speech, a loss, in the end, of culture. A fascinating conversation with Carl Benjamin, a.k.a. Sargon of Akkad. 2, 3 revelations from the testimony and cross-examination of Stormy Daniels. And 3, Texas, Carolina, or Kansas City. What's the best barbecue? Let's break it down with the founders of Masterbuilt, John and John 2, McLemore. It is the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel, the Fox News Facebook page, and always on demand by subscribing, if you listen to us on podcast, subscribing on Apple or Spotify. If you are a terrestrial listener of the radio, there will be big news coming sometime in the near future about the future of the Will Cain Show. But if you prefer to watch this show, you can subscribe on YouTube and you can catch the full episode whenever you like, or go back and watch fascinating conversations and debates, like with the likes of which are YouTuber Destiny, YouTuber Nerderotic, or Tony Robbins, Dave Portnoy, or Stephen A. Smith. Just hit subscribe to the Will Cain Show on YouTube. In some ways, I like to lean into bias. I mean, there is a effort. There's a goal of objectivity, not as a pretense of some type of standard or pillar of journalism, but rather just as an ability to accurately see the world. You can't just see it through the subjective prism of your own two eyes. You got to do your best to see what is true. But you have to start with know thyself, what is true. In that sense, I've always, in some ways, owned my bias. I share openly with you and every audience I've ever been with my political leanings. There is no secret to my bias when it comes to Texas and Dallas area sports. I certainly was looking through the lens last night when it looked to me like one Dallas Maverick cannot breathe on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of the Oklahoma City Thunder. That was the worst officiated, most whistle-filled playoff game I've ever seen in my life. Rough night in Big D as the Stars choke up a 3-0 lead as well in their second-round series against the Avalanche. But I own my bias. I admit to those blue and silver, blue and green, green and black, burnt orange tinted glasses. So when I tell you what's the best barbecue, is it KC, is it Texas, or is it Carolina? When I tell you it is Texas, I acknowledge some level of bias. But just because you're biased doesn't mean you're wrong. So which is the best barbecue, Kansas City, Carolina, or Texas? We're going to have a conversation a little bit later with my friends, the McLemore Boys, John and John 2. Fascinating entrepreneurial story about creating Masterbuilt, and they'll help settle that debate between Texas, Kansas City, and Carolina. And stick in as well as I break down for you the 3 biggest revelations coming out of the testimony and cross-examination of Stormy Daniels. But let us start with the fall of Western civilization. Let us start with the consequences of mass migration. Let us start with story number 1. Carl Benjamin is also known as Sargon of Akkad. He's the founder and co-host of Lotus Eaters, the host of Sargon of Akkad on YouTube, and he joins us now on the Will Cain Show. Thanks for being here, Carl.
Many thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Who is Sargon of Akkad?
He was an ancient Mesopotamian emperor that I used as I'm quite old. So back in the early days of the internet, you didn't use your real name online, and I just hadn't got out of the habit by the time I started a YouTube channel. And had I known that it was going to grow into anything significant, I would have just used my proper name.
Why was this ancient Mesopotamian leader your inspiration? Why Sargon of Akkad?
It's just a cool figure, to be honest, because he's the first proper emperor in history, and we don't know that much about him. But apparently he was very victorious. And so it was just something I found interesting, really. No particular significance behind it.
Just the first emperor, not the last. I want to start with current events, Carl, if we could. I think it'll be a great window into a deeper conversation about what I don't think is a hyperbolic statement, the fall of Western civilization. I want to start, if you wouldn't mind, in Germany. A story out of Germany where a politician named Marie-Therese Kaiser of the Alternative for Germany party tweeted or posted on social media back in 2021 that Afghans in Germany feature particularly high levels of gang rape activity. Now, as part of this, Kaiser included data, government-confirmed, government-published data. This was a post in August 2021, where she linked to foreigners as misrepresented in half of all gang rape cases. For that, by the way, now she has been prosecuted. She's been fined $6,000 and will have a criminal record in Germany. Now, I think you can attest to this. No country, really, not just in Western civilization, but across the globe, holds free speech in quite the same esteem as the United States of America. Every other country seems to have embraced the idea of hate speech. But this is a shocking level of censorship and repressing prosecution of the cultural value of free speech, when one would think republishing government data would be something that would be culturally embraced as free speech.
One thing I think people in the English-speaking world don't realize is that free speech is actually a very Anglo value. Outside of the English-speaking world, it just isn't something that people generally support. And so we, as English speakers, take it as a given that, of course, it's our right to speak because it's our tongue in our head, and we have the God-given right to do that. But that's just not the case most other places in the world. And actually, the history of power dynamics is the history of repression and censorship of unpopular ideas because they threaten the status quo. And Germany is actually no different in that. The interesting thing in the modern era is actually this repression is being done in the name of liberalism. Because especially in the case of Germany there, if you point out that a particular kind of person has a particular propensity to commit crime on average higher than other groups, then what you're saying is that all people are not the same. And that's actually one of the core principles of liberalism, is that no, we are all the same, and we are all just blank slates, and we actually come from this hypothetical kind of abstract original man. And so if you point out, well, this group doesn't appear to be following that pattern, they're not the same as everyone else, then the whole superstructure that's been built on top of this assumption becomes suspect. And the questions then start getting raised. Okay, well, why are there loads of Afghans in Germany who have a higher propensity to commit sexual crimes, and on and on and on? And suddenly all of the decisions that have been made in the sort of latter half of the 20th century become suspect. And so I think it's just far easier for the German government to censor and prosecute, even if it makes no sense.
Yes. I also think there is the condition, the little devil that sits on the shoulder of humanity, that is not unique to the non-Anglo-speaking world, that devil exists within the soul of the Anglo world as well, that aspires to yell shut up at anything that they disagree with, at anything they dislike. And it makes me concerned. In the United States of America, there's two levels to this kind of embrace of free speech. There's literally the governmental lawful enforcement of it through the Constitution of the United States. But then there's also the cultural embrace. You know, the idea that most people walking around America thought, yeah, even though I don't like what you have to say, I will defend to the death your right to say it. That has been completely lost. And I think that's we can see that in America with our neighbor, but you can see it in the rest of the Anglo world, meaning the UK, Canada, Australia, where there really is no culturally similar belief about free speech as is held in the United States.
Yeah, the United States is definitely unique in the fact that it has it codified into the Constitution. But I think you are right to point out that the real Constitution exists inscribed on the hearts of men. And if they don't believe the things that they ought to believe in that regard, then the very notion of it will just become eroded away through non-legal means, even if legally and technically they have that protection. We see this in the chilling effect of cancel culture now. Nothing illegal has been done when you're deleted from a social media platform or your bank account is taken away from you or something like that. These companies are actually well within their legal rights to refuse service if they want. It's just such or it was such an unusual social norm to that this just didn't occur. And so no legal protection was set up for this. And this actually happened recently in the United Kingdom with Nigel Farage, where his bank tried to shut him down for the fact that he wasn't woke. And the Conservative government, one of the few conservative things they actually have done, is to step in and say, well, hang on a second. To exist in modern society, people need bank accounts. Actually, maybe that shouldn't be allowed. And the bank has rolled that back. But the ever-looming specter of that still hangs over all political discourse. At some point, institutions that we assumed were non-political can become engaged and become political and just roundly deplatform people, even if it's not the state persecuting you. So I think actually in the modern world, because of it's the speed of communication that's the problem, and really with social media is responsible for this, because it's very difficult to create such an amount of noise around a person that a company feels that they have to then take an action or else face a consumer boycott or something like that. This is something that's quite new, and I think it is the technology that's facilitated this. And I think the law actually needs to catch up on this one, because to exist in the modern world, you do have to have electronic bank accounts, credit cards. You have to be able to access the internet. You have to be able to communicate with other people. And this is just one of those cases where we need to be sensible and serious about this and say, well, no, everyone has a right to participate in society, no matter how unpalatable their opinions might be.
Well, the reason that I focus, as you so eloquently put it, on the Constitution inscribed on the hearts of men, and the reason that I focused on the separation between the United States and the rest of the Anglo world, after you rightfully focused on the separation between the Anglo world and the rest of the world and how they see free speech, is that I see the UK and Canada and Australia as a bit of a canary in the coal mine for what could be and most likely will be coming to the United States of America. I don't think we're exempt, and I think our embrace of free speech is under great threat. But I look at what's happening, for example, in Canada, and this is another current event to draw your attention to, where they've introduced, the Trudeau administration has introduced the Online Harms Bill C-63. Many people are talking about this. Jordan Peterson has spoken out about it. On one hand, people are suggesting the most outrageous part of this is that it is retroactive. So if you at any point in your life have posted something hateful will remain undefined. But if you have posted something hateful and then it is published, quote unquote, published later by a retweet, if it's determined that you had the ability in the interim to delete that post, then you are going to be held responsible for the reposting of that. But others have pointed out, Carl, it's not the retrospective that's so nefarious. The Spectator wrote this up, and it was pointed out, if the courts believe you are likely to commit a quote-unquote hate crime or disseminate hate propaganda, again, not defined, you can be placed under house arrest and your ability to communicate with others restricted. So you can be held responsible, if this bill were to be adopted in Canada, for everything you've said in the past and everything you may say, they suspect you may say in the future. We're moving beyond hate speech into hate thought.
Yeah, this isn't the first example of this either. Scotland also introduced a kind of hate crimes bill. I can't remember the exact name of the legislation off the top of my head, but it would allow the state to prosecute you for things that you said in your own living room. If somehow they were to gain knowledge of what you had said, possibly, I don't know, through your mobile phone, always listening to you or something like that. If an AI algorithm went through it and caught you saying something, or it could just be reported by a family member, you could face similar punishments, not quite that extreme, but you could still be prosecuted and find yourself with a criminal record. I mean, this is the sort of thing that used to be the subject of 20th century dystopian fiction that is now becoming 21st century technological reality. And again, it's one of those things where the technology is just getting so far ahead of what we're actually cognizant of, really the danger of. I mean, it always seemed ridiculous that there would be a telescreen in Winston's front room that would listen to and see everything that he was doing. But no, we're actually there now. Everyone's got an Amazon Alexa in their households. Well, I don't, but a lot of people do.
Well, this device, your phone,
so, yeah,
to your point,
exactly.
listens.
It's constantly listening. And it turns out that this wasn't a problem if there wasn't an executive managerial class of people who weren't prepared to take advantage of that, or at least if they were going to take advantage of it, they'd at least just be giving me tailored adverts on my Facebook feed or something. But when it comes to now, no, they're going to legislate your ability to think and say things out of existence and actively punish you for it, then it becomes a clear and present danger to the average citizen. And this kind of level of managerial control is really, it's unprecedented, because they've never had this kind of access to the individual citizen before. And AI especially is going to allow them to be able to filter through the undoubtedly billions of conversations that they'll have to track in order to find the ones that they particularly hate. And this is just something that nobody really thought was going to become a reality, and yet here we are. So we as citizens should be taking this very, very seriously.
And the not insignificant detail that I offered in that setup of the Canadian law, that hate always remains undefined, increasingly, as illustrated in what happened in Germany, is hate can be defined as an accurate description of reality. What is happening in Germany? What is happening in the UK? What is happening in Ireland? What is happening in America? And so let's get to some of the substance of what is happening, at least in Europe. And I know in your estimation, at the hands of, or at least in part, at the hands of mass migration. Yeah, I saw this just in the last day or so, Carl. I saw that in England, less than 20% of Muslim adults are in full-time employment. Now, this is a stat from 2011, so we'll acknowledge that it's 15 years old. And it does include an age group that extends from 16 to 72. Now, it is also focused on full-time employment, not part-time employment. Now, all these things I'm qualifying, I think, are to be honest, perhaps, about the limitations on the value of the statistic, but they don't dismiss the value of the statistic. You could say that Muslims are disproportionately younger, so they would be disproportionately not full-time employed if they're 16, 17, 18 years old. And again, it could have changed over the last 15 years. But the overall British population at that time had a full-time employment of 35%, again, compared to 19.8%. What is going on when it comes to mass migration in the UK?
Mass migration in the UK was put upon the British people without their consent. At no point did any party run on a policy of increasing the amount of immigration into the United Kingdom, let alone increasing it to the extent that it has been done to us now. So in 1997, Tony Blair's new Labour government came in and, again, without the permission of the British public, decided to increase migration into the UK to a net of about 300,000, roughly, a year for about 10 years. Now, that's, for a country of what was, in England, 55 million people, that was a massive amount. And in the succeeding time, Tony Blair left office, I think it was 2007, and the Labour Party left in 2009, and in 2010 we got the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition, and then Conservative majorities up until this point. And immigration has only gone up in that time. In fact, it's become ridiculous. The Conservatives last year let in, I think it was 1.4 million new people into this country. And so the population of England now is somewhere around 70 million. It's hard to know exactly because there are a lot of people who are not simply captured on the census, because you can visit this country, and if you have large immigrant population areas, then people can illegally stay in them with friends, family members, and people that they know without the government being aware of it. For example, in 2011, one of the supermarket chains here pointed out that they think that they're feeding a country of about 80 million. So it could be there are many, many millions of people staying here that we just don't know about. And what this does is it really changes the nature of the country. When you have a relatively small, but ancient and settled culture, and you introduce lots of people who are just strangers to that culture, it's like putting a drop of water in oil. It changes things, and you see the oil moves away from the water because the people are just not familiar with one another. They just don't know how to expect the other people to act. And then when you bring in another million the next year, and then another million, and another million, this is the phenomenon of white flight. This is why it happens, because people are just not comfortable in their own towns and cities anymore. And so they are constantly fighting this losing battle to find somewhere they can just feel that things are expected and normal and predictable around them. And it's come to the point where even now quite small and rural towns have got a significant number of immigrants living in them. And you just think, well, when did we ask for this? This is something that's been done to us. And the argument is always made, well, this is for the economic benefits of it. But as you pointed out, if most of them aren't working, then they're not contributing to the economy. Not that I think that would be a justification anyway, but it fails on its own merits. Because actually, the government has done a study recently, and they think that in the next 10 years, they're going to have to raise taxes by £100 million. No, it was 100 million. I think it was £100 million in order to pay for the expenses that this excess immigration is costing. Because we have lots of social services. We have the National Health Service. We have various benefits services and social housing. And these are accessible to anyone who comes to the country. It wouldn't be so much of a problem, at least economically, if the national services that we had were national services. But actually, because we've got such porous borders, they've become international services. We get a lot of health tourism. We get a lot of people coming here, literally breaking into the country. And you'd think because we were an island, this would be rather difficult to do. But no, they just sail across the English Channel on dinghies now to claim our benefits. And so I get to pay for these random people who claim to be refugees. And they say, okay, well, where have they come from? You get people like Albania. Okay, there's no war there. You've got a whole list of countries where there's just no war. The only refugees that we've taken that were legitimate are ones from Ukraine. And actually, we were happy to take them because they were actual refugees because Russia had invaded. But all of these other refugees, 90% single men, by the way, by the government's own figures, are clearly some kind of grifters who have come here just because we've got money. And they know it and we know it. And then, so when you go down to, say, the benefits office, you can see the people in there and, well, they're not natives. And so it's really, on every level, having a dramatic effect on our country, on a social level, an economic level, and on the level of sort of political morale as well. Because at no point do people actually feel themselves being represented until very recently. All of the top positions in the constituent nations of the United Kingdom were occupied by ethnic minorities. Now, that's not such a bad thing or anything like that. That's not something that I would normally complain about, except none of these people were elected to those positions. What would happen is a white British person was elected in a normal general election, and then they would do something that would get them deselected by their own party, and then their party would put up an ethnic minority person to fill that gap. Now, again, in isolation, that's not a bad thing. But then when the entire political upper stratum of the United Kingdom is filled by ethnic minorities, and you have left-wingers constantly going, but representation matters, representation matters. Well, okay, it does matter then. So why is it that Britain has an unelected Indian Prime Minister? Why is it that Scotland has an unelected Pakistani Prime Minister? Why is it that Wales has an unelected African First Minister? Why is it that the case? And so people not only are suffering from a kind of cultural malaise where they feel under massive demographic pressure, not only is the economy failing, so our high streets are just falling apart. It's abominable to see what's happening to the average British high street. But they also feel completely politically disenfranchised because they're not being ruled by people who are like them or the people that they even chose in the first place. Again, it's not a problem that they are ethnic minorities, but in isolation, in abstract, But the fact that they weren't elected and the fact that they don't represent the interests, or seem to represent the interests of the common person, combined with all of these other factors, make us feel that we're just in a collapsing country and that things have got completely out of our control and we don't know what to do.
Well, you point out the effects of mass migration on the economy, on politics, on social cohesion, on crime. I want to focus for one more moment on economy. It's not just the UK. This is happening all across Europe. The last statistic I gave you, by the way, was from the 2011 census, is published in the Guardian. This here is from The Economist. This shows what's happening in Denmark, and this shows the net. This shows the net contribution, tax benefits versus tax contribution of various constituencies within Denmark. If you're of Danish origin, you contribute more than you take away from the government. And you can see here, if anyone's listening, several different lines on this graph. The one line that falls far below in terms of non-contributions fiscally, economically, to the government in terms of taxes and benefits received is what's called MENA PT. It's Middle Eastern and North African, Pakistan, and Turkey. And it shows that at no point in the lifespan of these immigrants do they become economic net assets to Denmark. But here's the thing, whether or not you're pointing out, Carl, the economic effect or you're pointing out the political effect, this conversation is always dismissed as racist or white supremacist or xenophobic or whatever ad hominem attack is made against it. But it seems to me it brushes past some obvious truths, and those truths are culture exists. Culture exists. There are distinct cultures. Cultures are not always of equal values. Cultures have their own unique values that are of more value to them than to other cultures. And when you, as you point out, start messing with the culture in terms of who here holds the same values that founded this society, who here holds the same values as what we've maintained for centuries in this society, then you are like arrogantly just shaking the snow globe of society. You have no idea what the outcome will be, and it's not good enough to yell racist when you're experimenting on society in such a foundational and fundamental way.
100%. And it's also incredibly disrespectful to suggest that any kind of people don't have the right to belong to a cultural group. Because, I mean, in eras before the one we're in now, this was just taken as a given that there were peoples, as in these were the Goths, these were the Franks, these were the Romans, and they have different kind of civilizations, they're different kind of cultures. Nietzsche had a great way of framing it. Each people has its own language of good and evil that the others don't really understand. And that's a fantastic way of framing it, because that's genuinely how things actually are in real life. Because the problem, I think, at the moment is the runaway dominance of liberalism as a philosophy. Because liberalism begins in a particular kind of thought experiment and actually doesn't really represent the world. It assumes that there was a kind of pre-social man who didn't have all of the morals, the cultural habits, the values, and the norms that come with being in a society. The way that people say good morning to each other, or the way that people just tip, or something like that in the United States, whatever it is, all these small cultural accumulations that we carry with us over time. Well, they assume that those aren't a core part of what it is to be human. But the problem with that is that no one's born outside of a society. And so every single person is born and raised within a society and learns the language of good and evil that their own society has, whether they want to or not. You can't change that. Everyone is exactly the same. And the society you're born into, you carry with you everywhere you go. And this is really something that you notice in Britain because of accents. I've got quite a neutral Southern England accent. But if I came from anywhere else in England, people would hear it instantly. They would know my class status, the point of my origin, the kind of background I can be expected to have had. And it's the same for all other peoples everywhere else in the world. And so to suggest, well, we can just everyone is actually not a product of our own civilizations, and we can just bring them in and expect them all to just get along in the social contract, then this is...
Right.
It's to say the peoples don't matter, the groups don't matter. It's to say that this isn't a real thing
Yes.
about reality, but it is. It is real.
It is so fundamentally patronizing, not just to the culture that you represent or I represent, but the culture that you're pretending to champion as well. Because you're denying the existence, the fundamental foundational existence of civilization, the society, the way of life. And you just have to run the thought experiment in reverse. So I live in and I'm from Texas, Carl. You know, we have mass illegal and legal immigration in Texas, largely from the South, from Mexico or South America, right? And if you were to point out, well, there's a changing nature to Texas, then what are you, racist, you xenophobic? But if it went in reverse, I promise you, the Mexican culture would be like, why are you, no, this is not going to work for Mexico. We have our own distinct culture, and you're changing it. Or more obviously, if the immigration of the UK were to work in reverse, if you were to move to Saudi Arabia and say, and how about this thought experiment? The liberal and you fly your trans flag and you talk about all those values and you want to change that culture. How do you think that would be received? And so I don't know if it's unique to sort of the liberal ideology within Western culture, but it's not symmetrical. It's a denial of the existence of civilization and societies and ways of life, and it's asymmetrical. And I don't know the reason for that asymmetry other than self-loathing. Like, we hate our own culture. I mean, or just sheer ignorance.
I actually do think this is a feature of liberalism as a philosophy. And those places that are non-liberal obviously don't hold this philosophy. And you see it only where people are or have a commitment to liberal philosophy. You see it in Europe because after World War II, the liberal West won World War II on our side of the globe. In the East, you, of course, had communism. But it seems to be only the liberal West that really believes this. And I think it's because of the way that liberalism constructs itself philosophically, like I just explained, with the idea of the sort of pre-social man. And this is why in all of the times and in all the places, people are essentially just tribes. They are peoples. They have relationships with other peoples. And this is what the sort of national stereotypes are really about. And this is why they're useful as well, because it makes people predictable to one another. You know, I've traveled a lot around Europe. I lived in Germany for 8 years. The Germans just aren't like us. And when I say us, I mean the English-speaking peoples. It's not that they're bad. They're actually really nice people. They're really diligent. They're very polite. They pay their bills. They're never hostile to you when you're walking down the street or anything like that. But you can tell they're just not the same because they have strange cultural habits, and they'll say strange things where you say, oh, I don't know why you would have said that. But they do because they're just not like us, and that's fine. You know, we have a cultural stereotype of them. They have a cultural stereotype of us, and it makes us familiar to one another. And so that's. I
mean, it's even real quick. Sorry to interrupt, Carl.
No.
It's even I'm sure in your country, in mine. I mean, you know, I lived in the Northeast for a while. They're different than us down here in Texas, you know? And I know the provincialism of UK, you guys divide everything by family and region and accent and every which way.
Yeah, and I've traveled a lot around the US as well. And I tell you, man, I really enjoyed Texas because there's a sense of relaxation in Texas. And especially between like the races in the United States. I felt so much more racial tension in somewhere like New York or California than I did in Texas. In Texas, everyone was just really chilled out, whereas I could feel the tension in other places. And so, but this is the point, isn't it? You know, it's to say that different peoples are different, and it's actually not helpful to not recognize that. And it actually really does have a detrimental effect on social cohesion and just society in general if you can't perceive that. But the liberal mind rejects that and literally, as you say, stigmatizes that as being racist. It's like, well, no, it's not really about race or anything like that. It's about lots of different things, but it's also about just accepting reality. It's reality as it really is, and as we all actually experience it, and everyone knows that it's true. We act as if it's true. You know, when an Algerian walks through the door, we don't act the same as when a Chinese man walks through the door. We know that they're from different places. Right. We know they have different cultural habits. I'm two random examples. You know, when a Mexican walks through the door, you have different expectations. And so we're just lying to ourselves if we say that this isn't the reality of the thing.
That seems the key to me. So, the great idea of the United States of America, by the way, while Carl was talking, a shot popped up on our video feed of the McLemore Boys, who are coming up in just a moment here on the Will Cain Show to talk about barbecue. But it's the denial of reality, because the great experiment of the United States, Carl, was that it would be a melting pot. It wasn't a denial of an American culture. It was, we can take the best from every culture and we can make it something that creates this superior, and by the way, when we say superior, it's not like that's the very essence of it. It's not racist. It's like we're like our own little venture capital company. We've got our core founders. We've got our core. Right. Yeah. And we're going to add to it. But when you pretend that none of that exists, there was no original culture, and there aren't pluses and minuses. And by the way, there are pluses to other cultures that are better. There are ways that other cultures are better than my culture. And there are ways that my culture is better than other cultures, right? And so when you measure it all out, you can make coherent decisions about what's best for society. But when you pretend none of it exists and you just flood and say, oh, don't be, we're all the same, no one knows where this will be headed. No one knows what this will do. But I saw some stuff. You do some good stuff. And the main thing you talked about that my takeaway in the end is we can talk about crime. We can talk about the economy. We can talk about politics. But the loss of a sense of social cohesion, that people can walk around feeling connected to one another, is the deepest. It's the deepest part of this. If we don't start acknowledging the existence of social cohesion, you don't have a society.
No, what you have is a social contract where you have who was it that described them as? I think it was John Locke who described them as a society of rational devils. As long as they're all rational, this society will work for a society of evil people, as long as they all follow the same rules. And it's like, okay, but then all I have at the end of that is a society of evil people. I don't actually want to be surrounded by a bunch of people who I think might be evil. I'd like to be surrounded by a bunch of people who I know are good, actually. And that requires us to know one another and not be strangers to one another and actually care. I mean, one phenomenon that's been remarkable on social media is instances of horrific crimes being committed to people on public transport and no one intervenes. Like there was an example in Philadelphia a few years ago of a woman who was raped by a man on the subway train and no one intervened. That's unthinkable in almost any other society that's not a social contract society. That's not the rules are this and I'm just going to do that. People would feel moral obligations, and I'm sure many people did. But there's this kind of attitude that comes with this social contract society. It's like, well, none of us know each other. We don't feel obliged to help each other. We don't have to be. We just have to follow the rules. And so basically, I don't have to pay any attention to you as long as you're not breaking this rule. And the worst part about that is when someone feels, you know what, I just don't care about the rule anymore, and they do something terrible, no one's prepared for it. And so because you weren't allowed to have these expectations in advance, because of course that would make you a bigot of some kind. It's like, well, look, I'm sorry, man, but this is the reality of the thing, and we have to be able to deal with reality honestly.
Right.
And the question really the liberal should ask themselves is, why are you trying to deny reality? Why is your philosophy so divergent with what's really happening? And why are you okay with that? Why do you think that makes you a moral person? I think the moral person is the person who deals with what's happening in a just and righteous way, not the person who sits there with a prescription of rules that might totally be unreflective of what's happening on the ground and say, well, if you're not all doing this fantasy I have in my head, then you're all bad people. No, that's not how life works.
Wonderfully put. Carl Benjamin, you can check him out. It's Sargon of Akkad on YouTube, also the Lotus Eaters on YouTube. Fascinating conversation that hopefully will not be dismissed and hopefully definitely not regulated as hate speech when it's just, as we point out, attempting to understand reality. Carl, thanks for being on the Will Cain Show.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been great.
All right. The three big revelations from the Stormy Daniels testimony in the trial of Donald Trump, plus the McLemore Boys, coming up on the Will Cain Show.
I'm Dana Perino, co-host of The Five and co-anchor of America's Newsroom. Join me for my brand new podcast, Perino on Politics. Listeners of Everything Will Be Okay will gravitate toward this podcast too. Every Monday, I'm going to talk to people I trust in politics as they tell me what they're seeing and thinking in the 2024 election cycle. As they prep me to cover the upcoming election, they'll prep you, the voters, too. Make sure you subscribe to this series on foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts and leave a rating and review.
Saturday is baseball night in America on Fox.
What a catch!
The brightest stars
There we go!
and the biggest games take center stage.
Oh, baby!
This week, Nolan Arenado leads the Cardinals in an NL Central battle against the Brewers. Or rising star Ellie De La Cruz powers the Reds against the Giants. Saturday at 7 Eastern on Fox. Check for the game in your area.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
Hey, this is Trey Gowdy, host of the Trey Gowdy Podcast. Every Tuesday, you'll hear what's on my mind. Plus, every Thursday, there's a special bonus episode where we answer the questions that are on your mind. Make sure to spend your Tuesdays and Thursdays with Trey. Subscribe now at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts. Hope to see you.
America's listening to Fox News.
The three big takeaways, revelations from the testimony and cross-examination of Stormy Daniels in the trial of Donald Trump. It's the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel, and on the Fox News Facebook page. You can always subscribe at Apple, Spotify, or on YouTube. Cross-examination continues today of Stormy Daniels in the trial against Donald Trump in New York. I'll give you my three big revelations of what's taken place so far when it comes to Stormy Daniels. Number one, it was slimy. It was salacious. And that was the point. That's the point, in fact, of the entire trial. Stormy Daniels took the stand and she went into detail about her alleged affair with Donald Trump. She talked about missionary position. She said she came out of the bathroom and Donald Trump was laid across the bed in boxers and a T-shirt. She said she spanked him with a rolled-up magazine. She went into detail in detail so much so that the judge at one point had to tell her, we don't need to hear all of this. Well, that's the point. We don't need to hear any of this. None of it has relevance to the alleged accounting crimes against Donald Trump. She has no information. She has no insight. She knows nothing about the bookkeeping records of Donald Trump. And certainly none of this testimony has anything to do with the accounting. But it did make, apparently, according to reports, two jurors smirk. And Donald Trump, several times within the day, curse audibly. Apparently turned to his attorneys and said, this is bullshit. And he shook his head repeatedly. Also for that, he was chastised by the judge. But it was all too much. Trump's team advocated immediately for a mistrial. See, if this is irrelevant to the proceedings, all it's there to do is to throw slime, to paint Donald Trump in the minds of these jurors. It's to make them do exactly what this whole thing is about, make them dislike Donald Trump. You know, it's interesting. This was all written up in CNN.com, and I wanted to read it to you, but it's too long, but it was under the banner of analysis. Like, you know, okay, so is that opinion or is that reporting? But the reporting on CNN.com admitted that this is all political by nature. It lamented that the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case has been pushed back and won't now see the light of day before the November election. And the line in the CNN article was like putting all the more emphasis on Stormy Daniels' testimony that day. Well, why does that put more emphasis on Stormy Daniels? That, to me, is an admission, which we don't need admission, so we know anyway. You're not trying to get down to the bookkeeping notes of Donald Trump. You're trying to make this a political trial by throwing as much dirt as possible, including spanking with a rolled-up magazine. It should be declared a mistrial. Number two, the motivation of Stormy Daniels. Clearly, she was in this to make money. She said that she wasn't interested in talking about the story until after she saw the Access Hollywood story. At that point, she reached out to an attorney, and they started to push for a negotiation with Donald Trump to get some money. She got $130,000 out of it. She's capitalized on this from the beginning. She's not some victim. She is a profiteer in this entire enterprise. She has written books about it. She did a strip club act called Make America Horny Again. She's been motivated from the beginning into what personally benefits Stormy Daniels. And when she decided the $130,000 wasn't enough, what motivated her was to try to get more from Donald Trump. Bring you to point number 3. Takeaway from this. Her motivation is also that she hates Donald Trump. Because of all of this profit seeking and all this unseemliness, she lost a lawsuit again from Donald Trump for $500,000. She owes Donald Trump $500,000. And she has said, I will defy that court order. I will not pay him a single penny. Which, okay, if you are willing to defy a court order, which was established on cross-examination, why would you not defy an oath that you were taking in court that day? If you have no respect for the courtroom, if you have no respect for the requirements of you, why should we assume you have some respect for the oath you took today in taking the stand? She has said she hates Donald Trump. She's called him an orange turd. According to, and this time, CNN's legal analyst, this is huge. That's huge because it shows her lack of credibility because of her exhibited motivation in this trial. This is the tawdry part. CNN wrote, this is when it came back to life. It came back to life for you because this is what it's about for you, and this is what easier to write articles about. Because what it should be about, if it's about justice, is about accounting and bookkeeping. When it was dead, it was justice. Now that it's alive for you, it's injustice, it's slime, it's politics as a prosecution of Donald Trump. What's best? Texas, Kansas City, Carolina. And how did they build Masterbuilt? A conversation with the McLemore Boys next on the Will Cain Show.
Kudlow on Fox Business is now on the go for podcast fans. Download the Kudlow Show podcast every weekday at foxbusinesspodcasts.com. Kudlow covers the latest headlines and business trends with an emphasis on the financial impact facing households and businesses across the country. Listen to interviews with key business newsmakers. The Kudlow podcast will be available on the go after the show every weekday at foxbusinesspodcasts.com or wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Did you hear the news? Now you can. With instant updates from Fox News for Amazon Alexa, breaking stories and top headlines, the economy, and so much more. Brought to you by Fox News, America's #1 cable news network. Plus, setup couldn't be easier because everything's ready to go in the app. Just say,
Alexa, play news from Fox.
In Fox News.
It's the latest when you need it, on demand, from Fox News and Amazon Alexa. From the Fox News Podcasts Network. In these ever-changing times, you can rely on Fox News for hourly updates for the very latest news and information on your time. Listen and download now at foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. The Fox News Rundown, a contrast of perspectives you won't hear anywhere else. Your daily dose of news twice a day, featuring insight from top newsmakers, reporters, and Fox News contributors. Listen and subscribe now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
If you've ever seen Fox and Friends, you can't have missed them because they are definitely one of the friends in the universe of Fox and Friends. And they've got a new book out called Gather Grill, the McLemore Boys. John and John 2 now on the Will Cain Show streaming live
Let's
at
go,
foxnews.com,
baby.
Fox News YouTube, and Fox News Facebook. Always. John 2. That 2 is awkwardly placed. Like when you say your whole name, do you say John 2 McLemore, John McLemore II, Jr., Deuce? What do you like when we drop the last name? It's easy. It's John and John 2. But when we do the whole name, that's hard, man.
I'm advocating for Big John and Little John.
Yeah, and you are Big John.
Oh,
yeah.
As long as it's not John. As long as it's not John Douche, not Deuce.
Now I'm glad to have you guys on. We're going to talk about Gather Grill, the new book out full of recipes, stories.
Yep.
Let's go.
There's even a little recipe dedicated to me in here. I
There
saw.
is. I got a
I think
page
it's
marked for you.
Texas themed.
Yeah. I'm telling
You
you.
do?
I have a page marked specifically for you. I think we were in Daytona and Talladega. We got a little mac and cheese brisket sandwich. Story is all about you.
That's
How about
right.
that? We might even have some of that on Saturday.
I saw it said "Go Longhorns." Yeah, you gave me a "Go Longhorns" in there. That's much appreciated.
Yeah, I didn't say Roll Tide.
Okay, wait, but you did say "Roll Tide"
No,
as well.
I did not.
Settle this debate for us.
Okay.
I saw it on another page. Then I did a little reading in the book. But be objective best you can.
Okay.
Barbecue is before we do the debate.
Okay.
What is barbecue? By the way, is barbecue brisket, ribs, chicken, anything you want? Like, what gets to be under the banner of barbecue?
To me, it's subjective, but I think a general rule of thumb is people assume that that's outdoor cooking.
Yeah.
But true barbecue to a Georgian or probably a Texan is going to be something large cut of meat related.
Yeah. A brisket, a butt, ribs, chicken qualifies that. It's funny, you hear people sometimes say, hey, we're going to a barbecue this weekend. I was like, hey, what are y'all having? Hot dogs? It's like,
that's not really a barbecue.
That's not a barbecue. That's a cookout.
To a lot of people,
it's a cookout, not a barbecue.
A barbecue is kind of a similar word for just hanging and cooking, which is gathering and grilling.
That's
so.
it. Yeah.
If you said barbecue to me, this is what barbecue is to me.
Okay.
And this is going to get to the debate.
Okay.
Texas, Carolina, or Kansas City. Barbecue to me is a brisket, it's ribs, and it's sausage. It's those three things. They don't all have to be present, but definitely one of them have to be present. I actually don't know if you can have it without brisket. Brisket might be the core component, but if I go to a Texas barbecue shop, that's what's on the menu. That's the core components. They might have some chicken, maybe pulled pork. That's not a Texas thing as much.
Right.
But brisket, a sausage, and ribs.
Yeah, I'm actually going to agree with a little add-on to that. I think if you're doing really good barbecue chicken, that's a barbecue. I actually agree that pulled pork should be on that because obviously we do more pulled pork than anything. However, brisket for us now is such a big thing in the last couple of 3 years because we've learned so much about it with our friends at Lane's Barbecue about how to do a true brisket.
What's so interesting is I like growing up doing at Masterbuilt in our story and smoking. Brisket wasn't necessarily something we did all the time. We're from Georgia.
Yeah.
So I think if you ask somebody from Carolina or from Georgia, they would say, we're going to barbecue this weekend, and it includes probably different foods. It's going to be more of your pulled pork, side of things and ribs. And the sides are probably slightly different. They're probably more mac and cheese than they are, I don't know, mashed potatoes and or different style of doing them. And see, I probably wouldn't have included sausage in the term barbecue, but that's probably, it is in a general sense to me, but I don't know that that's one of the main three components, but I'm from Georgia. I just, that maybe culturally is a little different for me.
Yeah.
I would say it includes pulled pork and ribs.
Well, this kind of goes that conversation I was having with the guy, Carl Benjamin from the UK, before you guys came on about cultural differences. You know what that is, too? The reason sausage is a big part of the Texas barbecue experience is the influence of Germans. So we had German immigration in the 1800s, and they settled largely in Central Texas, which is kind of the heart of Texas barbecue.
Yeah.
And, this is Blacks and Kreitz's, it's Luling, Texas, it's Lockhart. And they were big on sausage. So you get all these spicy sausages, jalapeno sausages, and it's hard to pass up when you're there at the brisket's kind of your main thing. But, throw a link of sausage on there with me.
Yeah. Well, so here's another good example. You ever had a bull peanut?
Well, I don't consider them Texan, but I've had them. But I think that's the South infiltrating into Texas.
Correct.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are like, when we come up to New York, they're talking about recipes and stuff, and they look in our cookbook and they go, "You have boiled peanuts? Like what is a boiled peanut? A boiled peanut?" And so a boiled peanut. But cultural difference is, boiled peanuts is something I was raised on. But you can go almost to Texas and people don't do it a lot. Yeah. And then, a little bit of that kind of Cajun boiled peanut side, and then go up north and they don't do it. They've never even heard of it. So
I tell you, I'm fascinated by your comment about sausage being one of the three. And I've never thought about it until this conversation right here. What is interesting, Will, is we hardly ever have a cookout
100%
without sausage.
Yep.
We boil sausage in our low country boil. We smoke sausage when we're doing our pulled pork or our briskets. We've got a sausage, pimento cheese, jalapeno pepper appetizer. Yeah. So I'm going to actually now put sausage on my list that you can't have a barbecue without sausage.
We do a sausage bite where we smoke sausage and or a beef hot dog, which, little plug, we just signed on with 44 Farms. They do beef hot dogs. They're fantastic. But do sausage, smoke them, and then take them off, cut them up into little bites, put them on a griddle and or in a skillet, and sauce them a little hot sauce, Alabama white sauce or Carolina sauce. Mix that together, and you sear them off on a griddle.
Preach it, baby.
They are fantastic appetizers. So,
exactly. The sausage becomes the appetizer or just the side bite. It's 100%. Almost like a side item to the brisket.
Yes.
Hey, John, real quick, you talking about you guys in Georgia didn't necessarily you grew up, it was more pork-based. It wasn't as brisket-oriented as it has been for the last couple of years. That's pretty interesting, right? Like brisket, would you say brisket has taken over sort of smoking what you guys, I mean, when Masterbuilt's building a grill, they got to think about, how's this work for brisket?
Yeah.
Brisket seems to have exploded over, I don't know how many years now, but recently 5-10 years.
I think from a social media side, I think cuts like brisket, because they're those traditional, they're harder to do. And then you have states like Texas who are known for it, and the rest of the country kind of doesn't do it that great. And then people take that on as a challenge. You know how social media works. I think social media has created this brisket fantasy, which is really cool. So I think in a way it has. Brisket's become a centerpiece of barbecue because of the internet.
Yeah.
No different than like nobody ever heard of what a tri-tip was until it started coming from that West Coast, a region.
Yeah.
And tri-tip was a good cut of meat, but was more affordable, right? So people started buying it a lot, and then the internet kind of helps blow it up. I think brisket's a similar, aspect of that.
Yeah. So did tri-tip go up in price because of popularity or Bidenomics? It's a fair question.
Well, I'd never heard of tri-tip until I went to college in California. Yeah. And they were all like, every time they were going to have a cookout, it was like tri-tip. I still don't know what part of the cow that is. Like, no one, that's not a thing. I don't know about Georgia. That's not a thing in Texas. Like, people don't talk about tri-tip.
No, but speaking of, so back to brisket, right? So I do think, just my opinion, because we follow and are friends with a lot of barbecue influencers out there. We cook for a lot of people. We do a lot of events, a lot of demos. And brisket is so interesting how people's perspective of barbecue and or outdoor grilling is the first question they ask us is, do you have brisket?
Yeah.
And it's like a universal question that we get. And I don't think they're thinking, well, you're from Georgia or you're from Texas. They just assume your outdoor barbecues, we look like rednecks, probably drinking a beer, hanging out. We fit that profile.
Yeah.
And they assume that, we're cooking brisket. So I think it's a universal trait of barbecue. So I do think the internet could be probably applauded with that.
Yeah.
And then the trend of it. So
yeah. I do love that we've learned more about brisket. And I mentioned Lane's Barbecue a while ago. Ryan Lane is our brisket go-to expert. They're out of Bethlehem, Georgia. They do and supply all the spices and barbecue sauces when we come to the Fox Concert Summer Series and when we cook with y'all on Saturdays. And we've learned how to perfect the recipe from the master himself. So thank you, Ryan. And then we get asked, do you wrap? Do you not wrap? Do you do butcher paper? No butcher paper. Do you do fat cap up? Do you do fat cap? I mean, there's so many different ways of cooking a brisket.
So let's ask Will. Are you a brisket? Would you say you're a brisket expert? What's your brisket situation?
No, eating it, not cooking it.
So
we'll take care of that for you.
Have you ever heard of 44 Farms out of Texas?
No.
Yeah, I think they're out of Houston. So We just partnered with them. They're one of the largest registered Black Angus ranches still left in America. And, they're all grass-fed, just
Amazing
true
beef.
American ranch. None of this chemical green crap.
No plant-based stuff.
No plant-based, all that.
No lab-based stuff.
Lab-based stuff. But, and they've got
John, it's fat up, right?
Fat side up.
Yeah. I think so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of cooking it, it's fat side up. I'm a big believer in people, the whole misconception of when it hits 160, 165, you got to wrap. We learned from Lane's, you power through that and wrap at 180.
Yep. Butcher paper.
I personally like cooking mine a little hotter than 225. I think 225 is too low. I think that's where you get a better fat or smoke ring and helping set in the bark. And then I always wrap in butcher paper. Dads, I don't know that you're convinced that butcher paper makes that big of a difference. But that's the thing with brisket.
Do both. Yep.
Everybody has their own. Mm-hmm. Well, I do it this way, and it's better because, you know what I mean?
Here's what's cool about the book, Will. We have 9 categories in Gather and Grill, from breakfast to appetizers to sides to all 3 meats, leftovers, desserts, and brisket is not only one of the recipes in here. It's the 3-step brisket that we did at the concert series with you guys, but then we take that brisket and we do several things with it. We put it on it's a brisket, double trouble brisket butt sandwich. It's brisket and Boston butt with all the fixings on a big Wonder Bread hoagie. One of the great recipes that we've done for y'all is you take a Krispy Kreme donut and you griddle it with brisket and pimento cheese and another Krispy Kreme donut. It's heart attack waiting to happen, but it is so freaking good, man.
Can we just... Does it come with an insurance policy? Yeah. Can we just inject the diabetes?
It comes with a side of Lipitor.
I love it.
The other thing that I want to make sure we do is thank you for the friendship. Thank you for always being so supportive when we come here to New York. Anytime we travel, being a gamer to eat. Yeah. We might have a surprise for you on Saturday, so be ready. Don said, don't tell him what it is because it's not a surprise.
Dad's always like, we got a surprise, and then he tells him what the surprise is. I'm like, it's not a surprise anymore.
Yeah. And stories in this book are what make this book so much fun because all the people that we meet, it's not just a recipe. Paula Deen says it best, food without great people is just plain old food.
Yeah.
And our book is all about the stories and folks like you, dude. Yeah. So thank you.
Well, first of all, Gather and Grill, forward, by the way, is by Steve Ducey.
Yep.
And I can't say I've read the whole cookbook already, but I've definitely read some of it.
Yeah.
And you guys are some of the hardest working dudes. I can't believe family guys, Georgia boys, come up to New York so much without being required to. Boom. I go because I'm required to. I don't know what you guys are doing there now and why you're going to stay through the weekend. I do have an idea. It's for Gather and Grill.
There you go.
But what I was going to say is that I love what you said, and I guess we'll attribute it to Paula Deen about the stories, John. The one story I wanted to ask you about today, and it's not an easy one because it's like the whole biographical thing, so I'm going to narrow it in. So your dad starts what would become Masterbuilt in the backyard. You tell this story in the book, making fish cookers. He knew how to weld, right?
Yep.
And he starts doing this, and before you know it, it takes off enough that he can become his job.
Yep.
And then it becomes a family business, and you at age 18, John, take over right after, or don't take over, but you come into the business right after high school, at some point taking it over. What I wanted to ask you is, there is a moment beyond that entrepreneurial origin story where it appears to me it's at least at somewhere in the line of where you have really started to put your fingerprint on the business, and it becomes Masterbuilt. It becomes the big brand that we know of today. So if I asked you, John, like, what was the big moment? Was there a moment? Was there a decision? Was there something that you did that you felt that leap? You felt the rocket engine's fire. When was that?
I would say in 98, about 14 years after I had graduated from high school and my dad turned the company over to us boys and he stayed on as a silent partner for 14 years, and then he fully retired in 1998. And it was that moment my brother Don and I became 50-50 owners, and we basically said, hey, if we're going to really succeed at this thing, the company was named.
You were 34 at that time.
I was 32 at that time.
Okay.
Yep. I had been CEO and president of the company for about 10 years, but the growth really exploded from 98 on when we got together and said, hey, we've named this company after God because, my dad said the prayer. It's like, dude, you're the master, I'm the builder. If you help us grow this company, we'll name it after you, which is where the name Masterbuilt came from. Yep. And in 1998, my brother Don and I said, look, we're going to really turn this thing over to him. We started tithing off the profits of the company and really turn this thing over to him. And I think it was at that moment that it was just the two brothers. We were aligned on everything that we wanted to do to grow the company. There was no power struggles. He's still my best friend today. And we set out with the same agenda to grow this family business. We expanded outside of 3 states, and man, we blinked and we were global. A brand out there with some of the biggest names in the overall cooking industry. And honestly, it was the people that we met and who we were inspired to, run our business after. And Fox was super instrumental in us growing through the years with them, so thanks to them.
Yeah.
And then having a family that supported everything that we did, and us having the rewards of Masterbuilt help our family. I think all of those things combined really catapulted us to where we are today.
Well, I'm jealous of a lot of things. I'm jealous of John 2's recent football dominance with Georgia, although that's coming to an end.
Dogs.
Here come the horns. I'm jealous of that. I think it's duck and deer and quail and everything else ranch you got in Georgia that I'll have to visit at some time.
Let's go.
But the thing I'm most jealous of, and I'm just being honest about my jealousy here.
Yeah.
Is what you've built, John, in this right here. You two getting to work together. It is, I mean, not just that it's there, but it's there and it seems to work from what I can see. And if, I have 2 sons. If either of them wanted to spend the time around me that yours spends around you, John, that's it, man. That's it.
Yeah.
You just, you did it.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
I don't know, man. That it's awesome to see you guys, but also just see you guys always together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I will say, I try to encourage a lot of family businesses is hard. I mean, just in and of itself, it's hard. On top of the fact that we spend every day together, writing the book, we spent every day together. He was the best man at my wedding, so we do have a true friendship, and. I mean, you've got friends and best friends. It ain't perfect every day. And, you know, we have had our own sit-downs and discussions. But at the end of the day, we both care. We both love each other, and words matter. And, we try not to let the day come when we both don't respect each other enough or love each other enough to go, money ain't – it ain't about money. It ain't about – if fame, a book deal, it ain't about any of that. We love that we get to do it with each other, but
what's the perfect job?
Yeah. And I'll say this, somebody just reminded me this the other day. They were like, look, y'all have had just such tremendous success, and it's so cool getting to see you and your dad. They were like, don't miss the journey, for the destination. And I had a moment when we were writing the book where I was like, holy cow, how blessed am I to not only be healthy, all this great stuff going on. I have healthy parents that are still married, that love each other, and I get to and I choose to work with them every day. Mom just flew out from New York. We did Fox yesterday. So Mama Mac is always with us. I'm blessed to be able to do that, and I'm trying to take every advantage as I can to just spend time with my parents. So and we get to also make money doing what we do, which is a nice bonus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what the perfect job is,
He's not
Will?
dying on us, right?
No, I hope
That
not.
sounded like a eulogy almost.
Man.
No, it was
was.
beautiful.
So you know what the perfect job is, Will?
There isn't one.
The perfect job.
What
It
is it?
actually is. The perfect job is the job that you love so much you'd be willing to do it for free, but you do it so well they pay
Yeah.
you. That's the perfect job.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. All right, settle the debate on the way out real
Okay.
quick. Kansas City, Texas, or Carolina? We already said it's hard to do because what is barbecue, right? And what are we going to judge it on? Pork, brisket, ribs? What is it, though?
Georgia's
It's Texas,
not in
right?
the runnings?
I don't know how this came up, but Georgia wasn't. No.
So
I would say those three are the main three.
yeah,
No, I'm not trying to
I
dismiss Georgia.
Yeah, no,
Wouldn't you
I
say?
totally get what you're saying there. I would say personally, I know quite a few guys from Texas. It's hard to beat Texas, but I love Ainsley so much that it's hard not to want to root for Carolina. So,
Yeah, I would have to say in this order, Texas, because we have my oldest son lives in Texas, in Austin.
yeah.
So I'm gonna say Texas. I'm gonna say Kansas second, and then Carolina. Only because
I don't know.
Carolina barbecue is just not.
I think Kansas gets a lot of hype because of the competitions, but I don't. I know so many more
Well,
people
I
from
assume
Texas
you're
and
saying that.
Carolina. So
But the pork thing, I'm just not as big on pork as I am on beef.
Right,
That's
that's
why
right,
I would pick the other two.
Yeah, you know why we're so big on pork?
All right, guys, the book is.
Because it's so easy to cook.
Oh, really?
Oh,
There's a
yeah.
lot of great pork recipes right here and
Yeah.
brisket in Gather and Grill by the McLemore Boys. Go check it out. You have a lot of fun cookouts, outdoor barbecues,
Yep.
smoking competitions, whatever you want to call it. You have a lot of fun outdoor, like John said, with the family.
That's
right.
Food
Yep.
is food, but
thanks for having us
to,
on, Will.
Go to
family
Amazon and
special.
buy the
Yep.
book, baby.
Let's go.
Thank you, Will.
all right, there you go. Thank you, fellas. See you this weekend. There's John, the McLemore Boys, John and John too. The book is Gather and Grill. Go check it out at Amazon, and they'll appreciate it. Check them out this weekend on Fox and Friends. I think we have a brisket competition this weekend on Fox and Friends. I think we have Texas versus Tennessee. And what is Rachel going to put in there? Wisconsin barbecue? Yes, it'll be a competition between me and Pete. I don't know. That'll be this weekend on Fox and Friends. But until then, this is the Will Cain Show, and I will see you again next time.